Hello, this is Anna Imagination with the Healing Garden, and I'm taking a moment to do Dolor and Shadow, the Sage Cycle, Book One. This book is available on Amazon if you want to grab it and get your own copy and read along or read ahead. Today we are covering Part One, Chapter One. And going forward, I'm not going to be doing an introduction. I'm just going to type all this intro down at the bottom so you can just hit play and listen. That way, as we go through chapter by chapter, you can marathon this through and you don't have to hear the same introduction over and over again. Chapter 1, Lorlenalin. Eric, the King's High Marshal, towered over the refugees in Lorlenalin's keep as he made his way through the moonlit halls. Sleeping families had done their best to nestle up for the night on the stone floor. Every passage and stairwell overflowed with Alfar. No one had room to stretch out. His men performed well considering the circumstances, but still, 90,000. He glanced into one of the countless rooms filled with more than 24 people. Only this morning he had used most of the rooms for storage. Now, children slept sitting upright against their mothers. 90,000. He couldn't believe the report when he heard it 2 weeks ago. He and his men did well to prepare. But seeing this many refugees arriving at the steps of his keep without home or food had been enough to shock him into the reality of the numbers. His keep simply could not house them all. Outside, his men erected tents, thousands of tents, along the outer battlement. Alongside the river and even the waterfall, they had pitched rows upon rows of tents that would serve as permanent housing for the Schwaltafar until his men could build proper establishments. He still wasn't sure where he was going to put them all until then. The spring nights could get cold. Eric stopped at a closed door in the hall where orange light seeped through the crack of the floor and spilled onto the stone. The quiet whimper on the other side pulled at his broad chest. He uneasily shifted the sword on his hip and pushed the door open. The room was laden with simple fixings, fine enough to belong to a field marshal. A desk, a table, no ornamentation. On the wall, behind a door that led to a balcony, hung a tapestry embroidered with the Schwaltafar seal, a hammer intertwined with a tri-corner knot. The same seal the smiths had engraved into the armbands worn by all the king's men. On the bed, Colin sat sobbing softly on King Olaf's lap. From the red of his dry eyes, Elf had found more tears to shed for his wife. Colin stared wide-eyed, her lapis eyes swollen and red like her father's. The child lay with her fist pressed into her mouth, uninterested with anything he had to say. "Dagon's ready," Eric said. Elf dug at his eyes and nodded. Despite having reached his elding ages ago, gray now streaked the black of his shoulder-length hair and his full beard. The eternal youth of the king had waned since last they met. Exhaustion pulled on his face and made him appear much more like a middle-aged human instead of an Alfar king blessed with the eternal life of his people. Elf returned his hand to his daughter's back. "How is everyone?" he asked. "Have the Dokafar settled?" Eric furrowed his brow. "Dokafar?" "That's what the Schwaltafar who followed started calling themselves," Eof said. "I'm not sure when, really. Along the way they started, I think. The name just stayed with them. We found everyone abed. My men are still working on the latrines. I have another group working on food supply." Eof nodded warily. "What of the others?" Eric asked. "Have you heard anything?" "No. The Schwaltafar who stayed behind were not happy with my decision." Eric watched Eof tighten his mouth. His lip had started to shake. "I urged them to come with us, but they wouldn't abandon the fight." "How many?" Eric asked. Eof rubbed his face. "More than half. 120, maybe." Nausea flipped Eric's stomach. 120,000 left in Schwalte Elfachheim. He tried to imagine the number of Alfar who had chosen to stay behind as the city went up in seed flame. He and Gudrun alone knew it was seed flame. He was certain to keep it that way. Eric shook his head. "They won't make it. They won't listen." Eric heard the grief swell in Eof's voice. "And if I stayed to fight that battle?" Colin sniffed, and Eric watched a tear spill down her nose. "I had no choice but to protect those who I could," Eof said. "How is she?" Eric asked, nodding to the child. Elf made a conscious effort to rub her back again. About as tired and scared and grief-stricken as the rest of us. I have time, Eric said. I can take her if you wish. Elf nodded and placed a hand on her head. Cullen. Eric watched her eyes wander, then focus. I have to go. No, she sat up, her lip trembling as she looked to her father. No, I don't. Eric is here, Elf said. He'll watch you. No, please. What if I'll be right back? For his daughter, Elf forced his best smile. You must be strong. I'm not strong. Cullen shook her head. I'm not. Elf planted a kiss on the top of her head and stood from the bed. I'll be right back, he whispered, and nodded to Eric before heading out the door down the hall. Eric watched the princess pull her legs into her chest as she gathered the furs around her and dropped her face to her knees. Her long brown hair fell to the bed, shielding her face from the light. Cullen. Eric walked to the bed. I miss Ori. The furs muffled her voice. Eric sat on the bed in front of her. I know, Cullen. He tried to smile. But he'll be all right. And Grandmama, Cullen continued. Eric nodded. Gudrun will be here soon. I miss Mommy. Tremors tightened his body. Cullen looked up from her knees. I want Mommy. Eric clenched his teeth until he was certain they would break and held his breath until the pang eased enough for him to speak. I know. He swallowed the knot in his throat. We all do. I couldn't save her. No one could, he said. But I really couldn't. Cullen tipped her head, insisting. A beam of light caught her eyes, illuminating the rings of gold encompassing her iridescent irises. Eric caught himself from exclaiming. I wasn't strong, Cullen said. Father says I am, but I'm not. Another tear. Mommy wasn't strong either. Cullen buried her face back to her knees and cried. She mustn't know. Eric leaned closer. They were no longer alone. Kiddo was strong, Cullen. Kiddo was. His eyes burned. Very strong. Not like Daddy, Cullen said, raising her face to Eric's. Not like you or Dagan. Eric gently cupped Cullen's chin, which appeared dwarfed by his fingers. There was no mistaking the prominent ring of gold. If she hadn't been crying, if Aelf hadn't been grieving, they all would have seen it too. Kira had strength, Cullen. Then why is she dead? Her eyes searched his face as if she would find the answers there. If she were strong, then why? A tear escaped him, and Eric closed his eyes, cursing Aelf. He never should have left her. Not when he knew Dannon was hunting them. He was a fool for obeying his king. Cullen pulled her chin away and dropped her face back to her knees. I want to go home. She needs to forget. And what would you do there? Eric asked. She must forget. I could find her, Cullen sniffed. Ori and I would find her. Eric watched her silent through thoughts fly, and Cullen descended into another bout of crying. If she forgets, her grief will end. Come here, princess. Eric beckoned, and picking up the child from his bed, he pulled her onto his lap, where she curled up into a ball. It hurts so much, she said. I just want it to stop, to cut it out of me. If I were stronger, and what if you were stronger? Eric rocked. Then I could go back and get her, and I could have saved her. Not all her memories, Eric decided. Only some. And her sight. Surely her sight must go. If she sees, then she'll know. And if she's anything like her mother. Eric continued to rock her back and forth. There are things she cannot know. She already knows enough to figure things out when she gets older. If she remembers. She cannot remember. Eric? Yes, princess. Princesses aren't strong, she said. Do you think I will be strong? Yes, princess, Eric said. You will be strong. Like you and Dagan and father? He felt her hair brush his chin. Yes, princess, just like Dagan and Aelf. And you? She asked. Eric placed a hand to her forehead. And I, Eric whispered. Threads of gold like sand flowed from his hand and encompassed Cullen's head. Through her body he reached with his scythe until he located and linked the golden strands within that harbored her power. One by one he tugged on the strands and pushed his own scythe inside them until his scythe bound hers and pulled and changed its direction. And Gudrun, Eric said. Just like Gudrun. He withdrew his scythe, leaving hers alone to flow in the new direction. Already the child slept. Carefully, he laid her back on his bed, pulled his furs up around her neck, and kissed her brow. Good night, princess, he muttered. Several times he rubbed his hand over his face and made his way to the balcony. He needed air. The sea crashed upon the jagged rocks that made up the base of the keep carved into the mountainside. The black waters greeted him as coldly as a late winter chill. Eric breathed deep the sea air, expending his chest as far as it would go. Before he released that breath, he knew she was there. What did you do to her? Fand said. Slowly, Eric turned his head to the woman leaning two lax against his balcony. Her golden irises gleamed with that same nonchalance that urged him to attack her. I sealed off her memories, he answered with a tone of disgust and pulled his attention from the goddess. Fan tucked a strand of black hair behind her white tapered ear. It won't work, she chimed, too happily for the dreary mood of the keep. Eric stared at the generous curves of her body. What are you doing here, Fan? You didn't kill her. Eric looked back. The nonchalance was gone. In its place, fury peered from her golden eyes. Our agreement was that you kill her. I didn't agree. You proposed, Eric said. I'm not going to kill a child. She won't always be. Eric took a step toward the railing, adding several feet of space between them. She's hidden, he said. Dannon won't find her. She doesn't even know Colin exists. You think Dannon won't find out? Van pushed off the railing. Granddaughter to the great Druid. And you think Dannon can't find her? Fan stepped in, closing the space Eric had reserved between them. Kira is dead, Fan said, shoving her face uncomfortably close to Eric. Dannon is hunting you and Gudrun. Eric's throat tightened at the sound of Kira's name. Kira didn't make it, he said, and formed a fist when Fan cocked her hand in faint pity. Oh, so sorry. We've blocked Dannon's vision, Eric said. We blocked her sight. Dannon cannot find us. Van shrugged with a grin that encouraged Eric to leap off the balcony. There is still Volund, Fan said. Eric's back stiffened as he held his breath. Volund is unpredictable, Fan smiled. The moon did well to illuminate her face. Eric had to force himself to look away. He doesn't know where Colin is, he said, knowing how little that mattered. It's Volund, Fan said. Oh, he will find out. Gudrun and I are both with her. Gudrun isn't. Fan tipped her head ever so slightly. The black strand of hair fell back to her face. Where is Gudrun, Eric? I don't know. He felt her eyes scrape over him. You're telling the truth, she said. He could hear her smile fall. You really don't know. The space between them eased as he felt Fan back away. That child is better off dead than alive to me, Fan said over her shoulder. If Dannon ever suspects there was a child, you will not kill Kira's daughter, Eric said, meeting Fan's narrow eyes. You would never have her. Fan turned and walked to the edge of the balcony. The wind whipped her black hair about. Where are you going? Eric called. If the mood suits her, Dannon can track me, Fan answered, staring out over the sea. If I stay too long, it will raise questions. Once Dannon withdraws her troops from Trot the Alfheim, she will begin looking for you. And Gudrun, once that happens, if I go near that child, Dannon will find her. You will not kill Kira's daughter. Oh, you can have your precious princess, Fan said, and released a chuckle. But the moment Dannon finds her, the moment that child knows, oh, I'm coming for her. Eric paid no mind as Fan took the shape of a raven, with feathers as black as her hair. She flew into the night, leaving Eric alone with his princess.